I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. Welcome to the home stretch of 2017. I hope you're enjoying the holiday season with your family and your friends. This year, I've seen a lot of folks on social media saying that they are having a traditional holiday celebration. They are so happy that the old traditions are returning to Christmas. This makes me very happy too. So I look forward to seeing your posts with pictures of your family playing Snapdragon on Christmas Eve. You know, Snapdragon, where you pour brandy into a wide, shallow bowl and dump 24 raisins into the mix and you set it on fire. Everybody dives their bare hands into the mix to grab a raisin and toss it into their mouth while it's still on fire. I expect to see some singed hair and swollen tongues in those selfies. Maybe you still play blind man's bluff, where you blindfold somebody and they gotta chase and tag another player. But do you play it by the traditional rules? In the old rules, it was legal to put anything in front of the blindfolded player to make them trip and fall, and you weren't disqualified if you injured them. So a punch in the gut was fair play. Or maybe you'll be the one to post a video of your family playing a rousing game of questions and commands, the original holiday version of Truth or Dare. If you refuse to tell the truth, the command was either a monetary fine or you'd have to put your face into the fire until it was black with soot. Or they just filled you with whiskey and spun you until you puked. Welcome to a traditional Victorian Christmas celebration. These parlor games were popular in the mid-1840s, the same time that the Christmas tree, the Christmas stockings, and Christmas carols were invented. Up until the mid-1840s, Christmas was considered a second-class holiday in Victorian England. It was the second most popular winter celebration after Boxing Day. Christmas was considered a pagan festival that had people dress up in costume and get all kinds of naughty. Queen Victoria was not amused, and neither was Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell's crackdown on the holiday and the Industrial Revolution left Christmas only popular in the rural areas of the country. That is, until Charles Dickens wrote a novella that revived interest in the festival and made people remember that it's a time for family and celebration. Of course, he saved Christmas with a ghost story. The original title of A Christmas Carol was A Christmas Carol in prose, being a ghost story of Christmas. Now the name has been shortened over the years, conveniently dropping that whole ghost story part. And it is probably the most popular ghost story in the English language. Now, it might seem random that Charles Dickens picked a ghost story to change the way people felt about Christmas, but he was following a long-standing Christmas tradition. In Shakespeare's A Winter Tale is the line, "A sad tale's best for winter, I have one, of sprites and goblins." There are these lines in Christopher Marlowe's The Jew of Malta. "Now I remember those old woman's words who, in my wealth, would tell me winter's tales, and speak of spirits and ghosts that glide by night." All this preoccupation with ghosts and goblins might not sound very Christmassy, but it speaks to the ancient winter celebrations it grew from. The Christmas story, like the holiday celebration itself, has connections with the pagan winter solstice celebration and the festival known as Yule. The darkest day of the year was considered a time when the veil between the dead and the living was very thin. This was also considered the death of light, and then the rebirth of light. So death and rebirth and the memory of those lost to death were on everybody's minds, and they were addressed in tales told around the fire. So Snapdragon and the MMA version of Blind Man's Bluff are traditions that have been forgotten over the years, and probably for the best. But I think the Christmas ghost story needs to make a comeback. So I reached out to some of my listeners on social media to see how many of them knew about Christmas ghost stories. And I found out that the tradition has been kept alive. Great Britain has a proud heritage to the ancient world and to storytelling, and for decades, the art of telling ghost stories on Christmas has moved to television. In fact, a modern version of the Christmas ghost story is the Doctor Who Christmas special, which is so popular it jumped over the pond to the United States. Every year, there's a Doctor Who Christmas special, and every year, the Doctor must save the world from some form of scary apparition or monster. It's usually an alien, but that's just an update to the lore of the ghost, the update to the unknown. The 2012 Doctor Who Christmas special, The Snowman, where snowmen come to life with fangs and glowing eyes to attack families, is a great example of getting scary on Christmas Eve. Now, because he's such an odd character, I always wondered whether the Doctor was based on some legend and lore, if there was a connection to something older. And I may be completely wrong, but I think I might have found an inspiration for him in the Mummers play. The Mummers play is the oldest English Christmas tradition. It's over 1,000 years old. It's a costume pantomime that's based loosely on the tale of St. George and the Dragon. There are standard characters like St. George and the Turkish Knight, Boo Hiss, he's the bad guy, and Father Christmas. And there's another character, the Doctor. In the traditional Mummers play, there's a fierce sword fight between good and evil, and the good knight is struck and falls dead. But the Doctor appears out of nowhere and uses his crazy medicine to bring them back. He comes out of nowhere. He's a comical character. He saves the day by bringing back the good guy, and he has no name except the Doctor. I'll let my British listeners tell me if I'm reaching a little. However, there is no doubt about the inspiration for another British television tradition. In the 1970s, the BBC produced an annual holiday special entitled A Christmas Ghost Story. These were short movies made for television that were shown on Christmas Eve, and they were adaptations of classic ghost stories. Now, most of the stories were adaptations of the works of M.R. James, who is as important to modernizing the ghost story as H.P. Lovecraft is for expanding the limits of horror. James was a medievalist scholar and a provost at King's College, and his side hobby was writing ghost stories. Many of the main characters from his stories are academics who trust completely in empirical logic, and they come face to face with something unexplainable that they can't deny, or at times escape. Something that's right on the other side of the veil that refuses any logical definition. Legend has it that in 1893, M.R. James was invited to read one of his stories at the Chit Chat Society of Cambridge. This society was a club where the well-connected upper-class types gathered to tell each other stories. At the time, James's notoriety was in medieval studies, and the group expected to hear historical tales. They didn't expect a ghost story from James, or for him to tell it by candlelight. It was such a hit that he was asked to make an annual tradition of reading his newest ghost story on Christmas Eve. So, I want to spread this tradition by telling some Christmas ghost stories. My telling of these stories is going to be based on the BBC adaptations. Some of the adaptations diverge from the original stories, but I'm not going to break mood with analysis. So, let's start the mood. If you can, light a candle, grab some eggnog, and turn out the lights. I remember when I was a kid and I saw dust motes floating in a ray of sunlight in my house. My first thought was, how does the sun attract all that dust to it? When I moved around the beam of light, I made a horrible realization. That dust is everywhere. I'm breathing it right now. I know I coughed and put my hand over my mouth. Imagine if I had known then that 70% of dust is made up of human and animal skin. Dust, and what is in the dust, plays a role in our first ghost story, M.R. James' The Tractate Midoth, adapted for the BBC by Mark Gatiss in 2013. Now, the Tractate Midoth is an obscure Hebrew book that is part of the Talmud. Our story starts at the palatial old world estate of Vicar Rant, who is dying. He has called his last two living relatives, nephew John Eldred and niece Mary Simpson, to visit him one last time. We see Mary riding her bike towards this huge mansion, and as she heads in, a limousine heads out. She recognizes the driver to be her cousin, John Eldred, who is all smiles. So Mary pedals faster. The vicar's maid escorts Mary through the home, and she makes no secret how she loathes the man. He had no children, he had no friends, for good reason. All he had was a lot of money. She tells Mary that even though he is a man of the cloth, that he was a right devil. Where others had a soul, he had a corkscrew. You can't trust him in life or in death. The maid tells Mary that his time is short, his 11s are up. She's referring to how the two muscles in the back of the neck tighten up towards death, looking like a grotesque number 11 under the skin. Either way, he's about to meet his maker, the one above or the one below. You can tell which one the maid's betting on. When Mary enters the dying man's room, the vicar beckons her over to him. "Mary," he says, "there's something you must know." But it's not time for us to hear that confession yet. We fade to black. We cut to 20 years later at the library of a prestigious English university. A man comes to the front desk and asks if the head librarian can find a book for him. We see that the man inquiring about the book is the vicar's nephew, John Eldred. He may have been smiling 20 years ago, but now he is irritable and distracted. When the librarian tells him that the book is in the stacks, John asks him, is there anyone who can fetch the book for him? See, John says, I'm elderly and my knees, they can't handle the stairs and my eyes can't focus in the dim light. The head librarian calls over William Garrett, a young student working his way through college in the library. John tells William the name of the book, the Tractate Midoth. William knows where it would be found in the library stacks, so he runs off to get the book, while John waits, rather impatiently. William walks the older stacks of the library where dust motes float in the few shafts of sunlight in the dark halls, and rare books are kept behind locked iron gates. After some time, William comes down to the lobby to meet Eldred, empty-handed and apologetic. I'm sorry, sir, but it looks like when I got there, a gentleman was looking at it. Now, John's upset that this boy didn't bring him the book, but when he hears about the man, he gets nervous. What did this man look like? He asks. Oh, he's a small, bald man who was wearing an old black cloak, like an old priest's garments. I didn't get a good look at him, but he was on his way down, so he should be here soon. John looks past William, down the hall, to a partially open door that leads to a staircase. Nothing moves there except motes of dust floating in the fading sunlight. John says, No, I have to leave immediately to catch a train. I can't wait. But he says he'll return to inquire about the book tomorrow, and before the librarians can discuss this any more with him, John makes a hasty exit. Later, as the library is getting ready to close, William realizes that the old man in the black cowl didn't come downstairs. He climbs the stairs, and he enters the old portion of the library. When he gets to the area he saw the man, there's nobody there, but the Tractate Midoth is back in its rightful place. The air is full of dust and the faint smell of rot. The next day, John Eldred returns to inquire about the book bright and early, and William runs off to fetch it. He's walking the dusty halls, and he sees someone standing inside one of the rare book areas, behind the locked iron gate. The figure has his back to William. The figure is dressed in a black priest's cloak. William calls out to him, You need help. There's silence. And then the figure begins to turn, slowly. And it is revealed to William that he has been speaking to a rotting corpse. The young librarian screams in horror and faints. He is revived and sent home, and in all the chaos, John Eldred once again leaves without the book he came for. When William confides to a fellow librarian that he's sure he saw a ghost, he's met with embarrassed skepticism. "Didn't you once believe in ghosts?" asked William. "Yes," says the librarian, "and we used to believe the sun revolved around the earth and the moon was made of green cheese." It is decided that William has been overworking himself and he should take a trip to the seaside to recuperate. On the train to the seaside, William gets into a conversation with an older woman and her daughter. They both run a boarding house that has a vacancy. We realize that the older woman is the niece of Vicar Rant, Mary Simpson. When the train arrives at the station and they disembark, William spies a figure hiding in the plumes of steam coming from the train locomotive. He can see the outline of a priest's black cloak. The figure moves towards him. Right before he loses consciousness again, he sees that his mind played a trick on him. It was just a normal priest meeting a family. However, he still caused a scene. So when Mary Simpson and her daughter get him to the boarding house, they ask him what happened. He dismisses it as exhaustion from his work at the library. Mentioning the library brings Mary to talk about a family mystery that involves a book that has held her fate for 20 years. She doesn't know the name of it. She doesn't know what it looks like. She only knows it's not in English. And now it is time for us to hear that confession of the dying Vicar Rant. We are back in his bedroom, 20 years earlier, with Mary. "Mary, there's something you must know," says Vicar Rant. "Even though I said I would split my inheritance equally between you and John, I've decided to put it in my will to give it all to John." Now we know why John was so happy when he left. Mary is obviously disappointed, but she says, "It's yours to do with as you wish, Uncle." But Vicar Rant continues, "However, I am not fond of John, so I made a second will, giving all of my fortune to you. I have told John about it, and that I have hidden it amongst my treasures. But I did not tell him where it is, and I will not tell you either. John has an advantage, as he will have my belongings, but I am going to tell you two things he does not know. The first, the will is in English, but he won't know that if he would see it." The vicar reaches into a pouch and pulls out a folded slip of paper and hands it to Mary. "This will help you find it," says the vicar. On the piece of paper are 3 numbers, 11, 3, 34. And now we return to the seaside boarding house of Mary Simpson, and she hands a slip of paper with the numbers 11, 3, 34 written on it to William. When she says the name of her rival, her cousin John Eldred, William recognizes the name. He realizes that Eldred is the man at the library who is obsessed with a tractate Midoth. William looks at those 3 numbers again, and he tells Mary he must return to the library immediately, but that he will return with more information. Back at the library, William goes to the shelf where the tractate Midoth is placed, and his suspicion is correct. The numbers 11, 3, 34 are the library call numbers for the book. However, the book isn't there. William finds out that while he was away, John Eldred sent a money order to have the book mailed to him. After doing some quick research, William realizes that the book was donated to the library by the Vicar Rant, and that's probably how Eldred tracked it down. Now, William uses the same deduction to track down Eldred. He takes a train to the address that the book donation came from, the palatial estate of the late Vicar Rant. William's hunch is correct, and we see that John Eldred waits at the train to greet the mailman. He's given a wrapped package that looks like it could be a book, and he walks off. William follows Eldred into the estate grounds, where Eldred finds a quiet spot on a bench to open the tractate. William hides behind a tree and watches. And Eldred turns the pages, his eyes scanning the Hebrew words. He gets to a certain page, and he stops, and he smiles. Eldred starts to tear the page out of the book when a black droplet from above, like a raindrop, lands on the page. It looks like ink, but the droplet starts to spread and grow and move across the page, and before Eldred can react, an inky smoke swirls around him, and as the smoke surrounds him, it begins to take solid form, and breaking through the wall of black surrounding him comes the face of the rotted corpse. The corpse bares its horrible teeth at him, and a spider crawls out of its mouth. Eldred tries to scream, and he's unable to make a sound. A rotting hand appears and caresses his face while he tries to scream. The only sound he makes is the final exhale of breath as he dies. However, none of this was visible to either William or a nearby groundskeeper. The only thing they saw was that his face turned black right before he collapsed. After a brief investigation, William returns to the university with a tractate in hand. William believes that the will is hidden inside the book, but he doesn't read Hebrew, so he confides in a fellow librarian who does. The librarian comes upon the page that was partially torn out by Eldred. It looks Hebrew, but these aren't like any Hebrew words I've ever seen, he says. After a few moments, the librarian has an idea. He grabs a mirror and he holds it next to the page. The page had been added into the book upside down, glued in upside down, and the letters were English, but they're stylized to blend in with the Hebrew, and they're written backwards. In the mirror, we can read it as a last will and testament, which bequeaths everything to Mary Simpson. We see what looks like a happy ending as Mary and her daughter move into the palatial estate. It even looks like love is in the air between William Garrett and Mary's daughter. But as they enter through the doorway into the mansion, the words of Vicar Rant's maid echo in Mary's ears. He was a right devil. Where others had a soul, he had a corkscrew. You can't trust him in life or in death. As they disappear deeper into the house, we see that the front door is open, and dust motes float in the beam of sun, right before a shadow appears on the floor, as if out of thin air. The end. I see the candle has burned down a bit, but I think there's still time for another Christmas ghost story before the darkness of the longest night closes in on us. The next story was the one my British listeners said scared them the most as children. It is Whistle and I'll Come to You. It aired on the BBC's Omnibus television series in 1968, and it was directed by Jonathan Miller. It was the predecessor to the Ghost Story for Christmas series. The impact of this teleplay gave birth to a revival of Christmas ghost stories on the BBC. The first thing we see and hear is the snap of new sheets being added to a pair of beds by the room service maids at a seaside hotel. The two maids spread and smooth and fold the sheets and the bedding with meticulous precision. They do not speak while they work. This is a ritual. They finish the work and they leave the room, quiet and waiting. We see who the room is waiting for. Professor Parkins is a socially awkward and introverted academic. He takes his holidays during the off-season so he can be left alone. The hotel is in a tourist town with sand dunes and beaches and a world-class golf course, but currently it is dead quiet. When Parkins arrives at the hotel, the proprietor tries to make small talk with him. "So, have you come for the golf?" he asks Parkins. No, I don't play golf much." and he lets any hope of a conversation die right there. Parkins is inside his head all the time, and he has lengthy conversations with himself under his breath. There's a funny moment when the hotel proprietor carries up Parkins' bags, and he hangs around the room muttering, waiting for a tip. Parkins is oblivious to what the man's doing, and he just lets him ramble until he finally leaves. When Parkins unpacks, we see that most of his suitcase was taken up by books. When the dinner gong is rung, the few guests who are in the hotel sit at the main table. Parkins enters and decides to sit alone at a smaller side table. One of the women at the table gives him a friendly smile as if to invite him to join them. He politely nods and then looks down at his place setting to ignore her. And then he begins a silent but very animated conversation with himself. The next morning, he and another guest, the Colonel, are the only ones at breakfast. The Colonel asks if he'd be interested in a round of golf, but Parkins declines. "I'm going to go on a trudge. I'll pack a lunch, and go to the dunes, and the beach, and to the cemetery." The Colonel responds with, "That's a bit too spooky for me." This cracks Parkins up, and he condescendingly repeats the word spooky while he eats. There are long periods of silence while Parkins trudges through the dunes and down to the beach. The only sounds are the waves, some birds. Parkins makes his way to the spooky graveyard, which sits atop a hill overlooking the beach. He comes upon a tombstone that hangs on the edge of an eroding cliff. The erosion has exposed the grave beneath, and a bone sticks out of the soil. Parkins picks up the bone, puts it in his jacket, and heads off down to the beach. The sun is setting, and as he walks the beach, he instinctively looks at what's behind him. There is a dark figure in the distance, standing still on the beach, silhouetted by the sun. It looks like the figure is watching him, or it could be a trick of the light. When he gets back to his room that night, he takes the bone out for examination. While he looks at it, Parkins realizes that the bone is hollowed, but it's packed with soil. When he cleans it, he finds that there are holes on one side of the bone and an inscription on the other. It's a whistle. He inspects the inscription and sees that it's in Latin. It translates to, "Who is this who is coming?" He decides to blow the whistle and see if he can find out the answer to that question. When he blows a note on the whistle, the wind begins to whip outside his window. And then we see the lonely beach with the sun dipping deep into the ocean. And we see the silhouetted figure still standing there while the wind blows. That night, Parkins has a hard time sleeping with the sounds of the wind hitting this old hotel, because some of the noises don't sound like the wind. Some of them sound like scratching inside the walls. Some of them sound like someone trying to open the door to his room. "Do you believe in ghosts, Professor?" asked the Colonel the next morning at breakfast. "Ghosts," says Parkins. That's a sticky one. Depends on what you mean. I'm never quite certain what I'm being asked. Now, you ask me if I believe in something like Australia. I know perfectly well what I'm being asked to judge. Discovered by Captain Cook, kangaroos. Given that, one can understand what kind of procedure you would use to confirm or disconfirm its existence. But one can't do the same for ghosts. There's no broad consensus now, is there? The Colonel takes a moment to think about how to answer the Professor, and then he responds with, "The spirits of the dead, the survival of the human personality." "Ah," says Professor Perkins, "the survival of the human personality. That's a different question. It has the grammatical appearance of an actual question, doesn't it? But I wonder, does it really mean anything? for the sake of argument, would we say that the personality survives like someone survives a train crash? The Colonel says, yes, it would be the same. Death, Parkins says, is not like other physical catastrophes. Nobody says they were badly hurt by death. The Colonel sits with that for a moment, then says, true. But there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Professor. Well, I prefer to think of it this way. There are more things in my philosophy than are dreamt of in heaven and earth. The Professor laughs, pleased with himself over his answer, which ends the conversation cold. That night, in his bedroom, Parkins keeps looking at the second bed in his room, still neatly made up. As he looks at it, he hears the words of the inscription on the bone, "Who is this who is coming?" And as he sits up in his bed, unable to sleep because of the sounds of the wind, he hears something that sounds like bed covers and sheets being pulled. That night, Parkins falls asleep, but he has a horrible nightmare where he is chased on the beach in the fog. He is running away from something we can't see. There is this horrible sound, like hearing the blood coursing through your temples when you have a bad headache. He hides behind a jetty on the beach, but whatever is chasing him finds him, and he starts running again in terror. And we see what he sees, a shapeless wraith that rides the wind, twisting towards him, and it has a distorted, unintelligible voice that shouts out to him. The next morning, he is informed by the maids that both beds in his room have been slept in. He does not remember moving from one bed to the other. Parkins tries to busy himself during the day, but this news has really disturbed him. He finally falls asleep in front of the fire in the empty sitting room, but he is startled awake when he hears himself saying, "Who is this who is coming?" That night, he awakens to the sound of sheets being pulled and covers being rumpled, and he hears what sounds like someone rubbing their feet over the covers to get comfortable. And then he sees it. The covers and the sheets have come alive and are raising and moving with the horrible rasp of fabric rubbing against itself. The sheets are raising and rolling like the wraith that chased him in his nightmare. But this is not in his nightmare. It is in his room, right in front of him. He can't scream. He can only moan. He is so horrified that he instinctively starts sucking his thumb. The Colonel runs into the bedroom, and Parkins is standing next to the bed sheets piled on the floor. The Colonel gently guides the Professor to sit him on the bed, fearing that this man has had a psychotic break. All Parkins can say is, "No, no, 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 no." The end. And there are plenty more Christmas ghost stories, but there are also more Christmases in the future, God willing. So let's make a date to meet again for some traditional holiday cheer next year. But right now, I want to give some gifts to you out there. Here are a few of my favorite things. For those of you that haven't listened to Blumhouse's weekly Shockwaves podcast, I highly recommend it. The hosts, Rob Galuzzo, Elric Kane, and Dr. Rebecca McKendry, are true horror fans and industry insiders who love freaking you out. And Shockwaves is also giving back and supporting horror in a great way. Shockwaves and Etheria Film Night have joined forces to create the Stephanie Rothman Fellowship for Women Student Filmmakers. In previous episodes of my show, I've discussed Etheria Film Night, the world's most respected showcase for women directors in genre films like horror and sci-fi. This $5,000 fellowship is open to any identifying woman in an undergraduate or graduate university or college film school program around the world. The fellowship funds can be used towards any film school-related expenses or to fund a film, and there is no submission fee. Qualifying students are encouraged to apply via Film Freeway. That's filmfreeway.com, and once you get there, the Stephanie Rothman Scholarship for Women Student Filmmakers page will be there. Now, applications will be open from December 1st, 2017 through April 1st, 2018, and I'll be posting a link on my webpage and social media for Film Freeway so that you can actually join in the submission. And hey, if you'd like to contribute to that fellowship, there are horror stocking stuffers at the Illuminated Horrors Etsy store. You can get Shockwaves t-shirts and swag and horror movie tchotchkes at Illuminated Horrors. And for the month of December, 100% of the profits go directly to the Stephanie Rothman Foundation. So if you want to show your support, you can do it this way. I'll have a direct link to the Illuminated Horrors Etsy store on my website, blah, blah, blah. Or you can search Etsy for Illuminated Horrors. That's etsy.com, shop, and then Illuminated Horrors. Here's some more of my favorite things. If you're missing the good old days of fanzines and Fangoria magazine, take a look at Evil Speak magazine. Evil Speak is focused on showcasing long-forgotten horror films, cult classics, and other films not normally covered by other horror mags of today. They also cover horror art and heavy metal music. Yay! There are so many contributors that there's so much original work in this that the magazine is really a trade paperback. Evil Speak Volume 4 was 211 pages. And I'll have an article coming up in the next volume, Volume 6, due out in April 2018. That's Evil Speak Magazine, and you can find the link to their website on my website. And if you had as fun of a time listening to guest 42nd Street Pete Chiarella as I did interviewing him, you can get more of his New York stories in print. Grindhouse Purgatory Magazine is 42nd Street Pete's brainchild, and it showcases the movies and atmosphere and, yes, even the smell of the deuce in its heyday. It's a one-of-a-kind publication that mixes movie analysis and autobiography and social commentary, and it's not to be missed. You can find 42nd Street Pete's writings, including his books and DVDs, on Amazon.com. I'll have his link on my site. Blah, blah, blah. Amazon.com, of course. I also want to give a shout out to author Isaac Thorne, who writes some great horror novels and short stories. I highly recommend his short story Dig 'Em, especially if you liked my podcast on faith-based horror films. You can find the works of horror author Isaac Thorne on his Amazon page, which I'll post on my webpage. Speaking of horror authors to look at, try out James Newman's Odd Man Out, which has been compared to Jack Ketchum's The Girl Next Door. That's high praise. You can find James Newman's Odd Man Out and his other novels at his Amazon page. Once again, I'll have that on mine. I also want to recommend Jason Kaufman's The Unrepentant Cinephile. Jason is a film critic and contributor to Film Monthly and Daily Grindhouse, and The Unrepentant Cinephile is a collection of his wonderful reviews of cult and independent films, both high and lowbrow. You can buy The Unrepentant Cinephile on Amazon. As for podcasts, let me once again tout the amazing Wrong Reel podcast with host James Hancock. Not only is his exuberance for all types of film contagious, his guests and film commentary make for a wildly entertaining listen. And he's so prolific that by the time you finish listening to an episode, he might have already dropped 2 more new ones for you. That's the Wrong Reel podcast, and you can find his webpage at wrongreel.com, and his Twitter and Facebook pages I will also promote. Another great podcast is Derek Carey's Astro Radio Z. Derek is an independent filmmaker, and he brings his knowledge and his love of film to every episode. And he's a completist. He devoted individual episodes to each of John Waters' films, so this is a place where you'll learn a thing or two. That's Astro Radio Z, and I'll have links to Derek's multiple projects on my site. And if you're in the New York City area and you like live performance, I strongly suggest you get out to see Kevin Geeks Out, a 2-hour video variety show with live pop culture commentary from guests. Each show has a theme, like Stephen King or Bigfoot or the band Kiss, and the show is done in front of a live audience of cinephiles and methadone clinic outpatients. Kevin Geeks Out is the brainchild of Emmy-nominated writer and comedian Kevin Marr, and you can find out more about where and when the next Kevin Geeks Out is happening at kevingeeksout.com. And you can find out more about Kevin at lovekevin.com. I also want to recommend filmmakers Mike Watt and Amy Lynn Best, who make great low-budget horror films. Their newest film, Razor Days, is an unnerving and morally ambiguous creep show that feels very, very topical given the sexual social unrest happening right now. You can order Razor Days through the Happy Cloud Pictures Facebook store, and that's facebook.com Happy Cloud Media LLC. I'll have a link to that as well. Mike Watt is also an author, and his Movie Outlaw series is full of fantastic essays about movies you may have never heard of, but you're going to demand to check them out after you read about them. You can find Mike's work on his Amazon.com page. I'll have a link to that as well. And now, I just want to thank all of you for listening. It's been a great gift to spend 2017 with my head down, creating stories and getting to talk about this stuff. I hope you have a great 2018. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And in the wings is a Hellbent for Horror book entitled Screaming for Pleasure. I'm currently writing it, and we're shooting for a release in the fall of 2018, so spread the word and keep your eye out. More info on that later. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.